will. Hi, everybody, welcome back. And we are here doing our 9th Policy and Practice Subcommittee meeting for the FAC. So looking forward to a working meeting today. And we've got quite a few things to do, but in the short time, what I'm going to do is kind of minimize my time. And again, I'm Boris Aratia, the designated federal officer. Let me do a quick roll call before we get started. And so let's go over there. All right, I'm just going to call the names quickly. I see Luke. See Richard.
Yep.
I see Amlan.
Yes.
I see Jenny.
Present.
And Steve. And I see Nigel. David.
Present. I'm also present.
All right, and Kimberly.
Present.
All right, great. So without further ado, I'm going to turn it over to Steve and Luke to get us started, and then I definitely can talk a little bit about the game plan for the May 4th meeting, but I'll let you guys get started first.
You want to start, Luke, or do you want me to just roll?
Sure. Just, looking forward to having our final kind of working session with the group today. As you know, we are close to a final draft of the position on single-use plastics. I think Steve and I had hoped to use this meeting to go through it and really make sure that it reflects all of the input of the committee and not just the fantastic work of Anish, David, and Jenny. And so I think focusing on that, getting ready for May 4th, making sure we have a good progress to report was kind of our primary goal for today. And I think, other than that, look forward to seeing you guys then. All yours, Steve.
And then what I had asked Boris to do before is just, again, we think everybody knows this, but if Boris or Stephanie could just give us a quick reminder about run of show and what our subcommittee is actually on the hook to do at the May meeting, and then a quick reminder that we'll be doing the dry run or the walkthrough next week. So
okay, no, absolutely, I'll be glad to do that. So a couple of you heard me this, but most of you haven't heard this spiel, so you'll get the full here. We are right now. So we thank everybody for putting the recommendation document together. So all 3 subcommittees put the recommendation document, and everybody's had an opportunity to review them. We are now looking for some input on the GSA side, and this is more of, at this point, we're just going to look and see if there's anything else that they have in mind, and just, we're going to take a look at that input and then share with Troy and Cassius, and then pass it on to you guys as well. But what we're looking for right now is the next week, we will have a dry run to go over the meeting plan. It's the meeting on the 4th. It's a 3-hour meeting. That sounds like a long time, but the 3 hours will go fast. We're going to have some initial remarks by Jeff and Crystal on the GSA leadership side, and then we are going to jump into each subcommittee, given a half-hour presentation and Q&A, all within a half hour. So your presentation, you would probably plan for about 20 minutes. And then the idea of the presentation is to share your story. Remember, we're going to have a public attendance. We expect a significant public attendance here from virtual side as well as in person. And then we're going to have, I see a thumbs up. I don't know how that got up there. But we're going to have a period for discussion during each subcommittee presentation. But after the 3 subcommittees present the recommendations, then we'll take a vote on all the recommendations. There's a total of 6 recommendations we're going to be voting on. And then after that, Troy and Cassius will summarize. Our administrator plans to be there at the end of the meeting for her to kind of hear what the whole package looks like. And then she'll be there to give some closing remarks and really tying in the work that you all have been doing to the bigger picture, what GSA is doing in this whole area of sustainability. So she'll tie that together, and then both Crystal and Jeff will give some closing remarks. I'll close the meeting and then we'll be done. So that's the plan for the May 4th meeting. As I said before, we're going to have the GSA Conference Center. We expect that we have capacity for 50 public participants, and the registrations are definitely coming in. I think we're at 17 or 18 in person. I expect that number to go up pretty much between now and the next couple of weeks. And then on the virtual side, I think we're up to 75, somewhere around that category. The idea here again is when you put together, so you want to spend some time today talking about your presentation. Look, I see you got to start on it already. You want to think about how you want to tell your story. You've got some really talented people on your subcommittee here, and so you get as creative as you want to get. Pictures, you know, make this is a story that you're not only telling GSA, but really a broader audience too, as to what your recommendation is all about. So that's kind of the run of show here. So between now and next week, what we will be hoping to get is maybe some draft slides for your presentation for the dry run. They don't have to be final. We're looking for everything to be final on the 28th, which is Friday the 28th. Let me talk about the recommendations for a minute. So what we're looking to do is once we go final with the recommendation documents, we're going to consolidate the 3 into one package that's going to have a cover letter signed by Troy and Cassius. And that letter with the recommendations attached to it will then go to GSA, addressed to Robin Carnahan, the administrator of GSA, but it will make its way through Jeff, Crystal, and our chain of command. So that's what that looks like. We will plan to go final with that document after the May 4th presentation, in case we want to make some changes or tweaks after after you all do the presentation. So then we'll finalize any final changes we want to make before we deliver that formally to GSA. So Leslie, you have your hand up.
Thanks, Boris. And it's quite possible I missed something because I was on vacation on the 6th when I think you met last, but I don't think I've seen a document to review. Am I confused? Has something come out for all of us to look at?
Yeah, we did share a folder with the 3 documents, and I'll make sure that I share that again with you.
If you don't mind, I just did a quick scan of all my GSA emails, and maybe I accidentally deleted. But
yeah, so if either Stephanie or Dave could share that with the group, that would be great, just so that they get the link to the folder that has the 3 documents. So there's 3 documents in this folder, 1 for each subcommittee. Yeah.
And do you want, and again, apologies if you've gone over this a million times, you want line edits, you want just high-level comments, or you want nothing?
You can do both, but I would not modify the document. Just put some comments on the side using the comment bubbles on the Google feature, and so those were the instructions.
Okay, all right, thank you. Apologies.
Okay.
And Leslie, our goal is it's a pretty short document. We're gonna go through the whole thing today, so you shouldn't have any surprises.
All right, I'm with you.
Okay. So back to you, Steve. I hope that was clear.
Okay.
I know I throw a lot of things at you all, but that's what we got.
So I think Leslie's comment is a good reminder that we're all in different places with regard to information sharing and the like. But what the main thing that we're hoping to do today is be in a position to, in effect, do the 2 things that Boris has just reminded us are coming quickly, or maybe 3 things, depending upon how you count them. We're going to do a dry run next week. We need to ultimately lock down the document and then ultimately the slides, and then we actually have to make the presentation in the May meeting. And the thing that I really want to emphasize here, other than the fact that we're speaking for the group, so we do want everybody's buy-in, but we need to turn what we have into a 20-minute presentation relatively soon. And so here's my recommendation for what we do with the time remaining. And in many ways, this is one of the lightest agendas that we've had for one of these meetings. But I want to just pause just for a moment and thank the people who did the work here. So let's be unequivocally clear that Jenny and David and Anish did some great work getting us to this point. I mean, if you haven't spent time with the document, it's a wonderful document. So first and foremost, I just wanted to pause and thank the people who actually did the work. And I want to include in that Luke really did a lot of work in here as well, particularly when I was unavailable. So thanks to the people who've actually done most of the work so far. Okay, I'd like to do three, or I think we would like to do three more things in the time remaining. First, we want to make sure that everyone is okay with the recommendations that we're making. To the extent that there are any significant tweaks, would like some warning on that, because I think what we don't want to be doing in the next few days is trying to do any kind of significant rewriting. And then it would be nice if we could plan how we're going to use our 20 minutes. As Boris mentioned, we already have a template for some slides, but again, we're just getting started there. But I think that eventually, before we end today, we should agree who would actually like to speak, and then to some extent allocate what it is that people would like to do in those presentations. But again, 20 minutes is 20 minutes. All right, so let me then suggest one, please.
Steve, quickly, Leslie, do you have a question, or was your hand just still
Oh,
up?
sorry, that's from previous.
Okay.
But I will dig into this folder so I can actually.
Okay, no worries. Steve, just one quick. Yeah, I have one quick point is on your plan for presenting the recommendation. So I would recommend that you and Luke at least have a little role in that, whether you're introducing or closing, and then you bring others, because it's important that they hear from all the chairs and co-chairs from each subcommittee. So just one thing, and you're doing your plan, just make sure the two of you have an opportunity to speak a little bit, and you can arrange it. You know, it could be very short, but it is important that we do that so it'll be consistent across the board.
Yep.
If that makes sense.
So unless someone has a different recommendation, the way I would suggest that we proceed at this point is, and again, I can share it, or Boris or someone else can share it, but I suggest that we actually put the recommendation up on the screen. And because I want to be relatively pragmatic about this, I don't think we should do it in order. What I'd be inclined to do is start with the conclusion and then go to the recommendations. And then once we're through with that, we can go through the document in any order we want. But again, it's a pretty short document. So if there's no objection, what I'd like to see is if Boris or someone could share the document and just put the conclusion portion in as large a font as we can on the screen. And then let's all just take a moment to read it and see if we're okay with it.
Hey, Dave, would you mind doing the sharing?
Not all. Which document, Boris?
The recommendation document. Yeah.
Okay.
The Google Doc.
And again, just to make sure, David, as I was saying to Boris earlier, the one that Boris sent around in the email that we were talking about with Leslie is different than the most recent one that's in the subcommittee folder. It's in the one where they're all brought together.
Okay. Yeah, that's the one I have, Steve.
Good. Okay, great. Thanks.
Is this the correct document?
Yep.
That is the one. Okay.
Okay. Thank you.
So.
Sorry, Steve, I don't understand what you're saying. It's different than the one Boris just sent me?
No.
No, the one I sent you is this one. Yeah, this is the one that you got from Dave, actually.
But if you were in the shared drive and you opened it this morning, it wouldn't be the one that you saw there.
Got it.
Okay, so David, if you don't mind, if you could just scroll down to the conclusion, and let's start with that. And then if you could grab your little slider bar and make it just a little bit bigger on the screen when you get there. Oh, up. Yeah, right there. And I hope no one is in any way insulted by this approach, but my recommendation is we should pause for a moment in this group, read it, and then if folks have comments or questions, I think it'd be great to address them one at a time.
Maybe I can start here. So this is Kimberly here. So I guess when I look at the conclusions here, if I just take it bullet by bullet, the excessive production and use of plastic packaging is a high priority global problem. Is it the actual production and use, or is it the fact that it's not being recycled and going into waste and landfills? So I'd probably nuance this because I don't think it's really the production or use of the plastic packaging. I think it's more about what's happening to it on the back end, I guess, would be one thing. And the other, which is I kind of said early in the above, like I understand our focus here on reducing in order to be responsive to GSA, but one of the things that we're not taking advantage of is those instances where you can't reduce or eliminate. And so there should be an effort to increase recyclability where they can. And it doesn't seem like we talk at all about increasing recyclability where programs exist or where they could exist. And so I just want us to be thoughtful that that seems like missing from this package.
Go ahead, Nigel. I see Nigel's hand next.
Right.
Thanks. I understand the point about recycling, but I think we've heard from speakers, and I think there's enough evidence out there that the recyclability challenge that all communities have, like what can be recycled, what percentage of things are recycled, what percentage of things that can be recycled that actually make it into the system is an ongoing challenge. So by reducing what the government purchases on the front end would be a more effective way of reducing the overall consumption versus putting so much emphasis on recycling.
Yeah, and I guess, Nigel, I see it actually the opposite way, where, like I said, I understand the focus on the reducing, but I would say using the power, like if I look at the last bullet, right, like we could seize the power of the federal government by asking for increased recyclability in certain areas. So you would have the incentive because you'd have a very large entity asking for this to help move forward in some way, shape, or form. So that's why I said that's the one piece I feel like is missing from this, is that we're not leveraging the power of the federal government that would be able to put pressure on encouraging incorporation of recyclable materials into things, especially in the instances where you won't be able to eliminate the materials.
Nigel, do you mind muting your phone?
I see David's hand next.
Thank you. Kimberly, I appreciate your comments. I think because this was the conclusion, we couldn't put every point in there. And I refer to Jenny and or Anish, that primarily through reduction and reuse was kind of a backhand way of sort of mentioning their other tools. So in the body of the document, and we'll probably get there later, there is a hierarchical approach. So I think it was we listed here in the conclusion sort of the top two things, but if you go down the list, you get to improve recyclability in there if the first two cannot be accomplished. And maybe it's worth putting it into a conclusion, but it is in the main body of the recommendation.
And
That's
I think I think Jenny was next.
Yeah, I was just going to say that we do have a whole section on improving recycling, but the conclusion, we felt like because of the ANPR's focus on reduction, we were sticking closer to reduction there.
I guess I recognize what both you, Jenny, and David and Nigel are saying here. I probably would strongly recommend that we put something in the conclusion about recyclability as well. I'd be uncomfortable personally without having something in the conclusion about recyclability.
I mean, I guess one of the realities that we're dealing with here is this is one of the realities of not necessarily doing the document in order. And I guess one of the questions is we have to decide as a group whether we're going to try to get everything into the conclusion or not. But I see that Leslie's hands up.
Leslie, you're muted. Yeah.
Sorry, I hate when other people do this and I'm always guilty myself. Apologies. So a couple quick thoughts. One, where we mentioned Amazon, I know there's been a lot of talk on the calls I've been on about supporting small businesses, some of the struggles. I just wonder if we want to feature literally the largest company in the world kind of as the poster child without also mentioning maybe successful reduction programs that are being undertaken by small businesses or disadvantaged businesses. Might be worth saying. I think we should verify that the incentive program Amazon is still offering claim to be offering is still in practice and is actually successful. Just maybe you all know something differently, but I just think it's worth. I've had a couple of instances where Amazon has moved back from public statements, and so it'd be good just to, I think, verify that. And then finally, I wonder, just I'm in looking very quickly at these other recommendations from the other subcommittees that seem to be a bit more far-reaching in terms of the breadth of different issues they tackle. And we're just tackling plastics, and I don't mean just, but we are tackling, our focus is on plastics as opposed to energy use or other things. If we want to just say something about why we have chosen this particular thing, either it delivers quickest impact, it's most pressing, the federal government can have the biggest market changing effect, et cetera.
So Leslie, I think to your Amazon point, let's revisit it when we go to that section. And I think for the conclusion, Dr. White has made a suggested point, and maybe we can put an asterisk here and come back to it, because maybe what we'll go through in the remainder of the document may lead us to be more creative here in the conclusion. David, I see your hand up.
Yeah, no, thank you, Luke. I wanted to respond, Leslie, to your great observation. We talked a little bit about this in the industry partnership, sort of about the recommendations and pointing to other recommendations. But another thing that came up was some recommendations are really system changing, where this seems to be a bit more of a finite kind of recommendation. And again, I don't know how to parlay that into what you just suggested, Leslie, was pointing to this is not the only recommendation that's going to come from Policy and Practice. We'll have other ones. I'm not sure how to point to that in this document, which is fairly singularly focused. So I'm just kind of opening up that to the general subcommittee.
Yeah, thanks, David. And I probably wouldn't have even flagged it as such, except looking at the others, they have a broader kind of coverage.
I think this is Jenny. We tried to do some framing at the beginning about why we're tackling this in particular, and I think around the international negotiation and then the ANPR from GSA. But yeah, I understand. And then
and just to be clear, I mean, in case anyone's unaware of this, the task force that did most of the drafting actually isn't responsible for the introductory riff in there, which in large part Luke and I basically stuffed in there to get the thing going. So I don't want to suggest that the task force was in any way responsible for the introductory riff. I do think, however, that maybe my suggestion of going out of order has been somewhat improvident, and it may make sense to go back. The other thing that I want to mention is I hear you, Leslie, and I agree that we are making a much more narrow recommendation than some of the other groups. But I am in some ways disinclined to start off on the weird going small while everybody else is going big. We only have 20 minutes. The recommendation kind of stands for itself. And I guess I am disinclined to start with dissembling in terms of the introduction, but everything else I basically agree with.
Yeah, I think you're misunderstanding me. I'm not proposing to say, look at us, we took a narrow view. I'm not proposing that at all. just to give some context, because if you're sitting and listening to all the different presentations, and again, I'm reading this very, very quickly, so I could be saying things that don't make any sense, but I think it's important not to kind of self-flagellate ourselves, but instead to say, look, we have picked an area that we think holds special promise or particular promise for making an impact from a advisory committee perspective.
David, we can see your email. You're poking around in your email now. So Leslie, I think if you look at the template I'm actually not sure if the template went out to the broader group, but this is not the only thing we're going to be speaking to. Steve and I are going to be speaking more broadly about the background on the committee, the priorities that we're looking at, the progress we're making on kind of other efforts. And so this is a narrow slice that we've come to a rapid conclusion on, but this is not intended to convey all of the work and everything that we've done and the only thing that we're thinking about. So there's the narrow recommendation, and then there's how that has fit into the work that we've done so far.
I just see Jenny's got her hand up.
Oh, yeah, I just wanted to flag because you brought up the Amazon piece. Totally feel you on that. And I think we're very open to other recommendations. We're just looking at kind of, when we're talking about scale of GSA, pointing out that others, large scale are incorporating or, have something that they're doing.
And I love the idea of giving examples. I just might consider also featuring a small business. I've heard so many good interventions during these sessions on the importance of including small businesses.
So if anyone has any examples that they'd like to share in that respect, to include, to swap out for this one or to add to it, feel free. So, thank you.
I have a question, just a general question, more logistical for the actual in-person meeting. So will there likely be changes to like our recommendations and the other work group recommendations based on the discussion at the meeting?
Yes, Kimberly, to answer your question, yes, there could definitely be updates after the presentation.
Okay.
Yeah, there is the opportunity, absolutely.
But I think the goal is for this group and the larger group to have kind of worked out a consensus amongst us, right?
Right.
I mean, that's what meetings like this are for, to figure out where we have, a broader set of, kind of diverse eyes can identify things that maybe those that have been so close to this document haven't been able to see.
Correct.
David?
Yeah, I want to go back to, I guess, the comment Leslie originally started and Jenny just responded to about Amazon and vendors. And maybe, Jenny, more. Are the vendors mostly small businesses? So this is, and I think what you were suggesting, that there's kind of a parallelism to this between what Amazon is doing for maybe its small vendors who tend to be small businesses and what GSA would do for its, cohort of suppliers, innovative suppliers, and that we're trying to attract to federal procurement.
Yeah, and I was reaching out to Amazon to try to see if someone would want to come speak with us about what they are doing in that space. I know that there have been various iterations, but I don't have a person to share yet. So I'm definitely not tied to that example. I just wanted to get an example to show that it's not, that it can be kind of a large scale business approach. So, but good to think about, and we can think about it, maybe swapping that out for something else or getting more clarity.
I definitely don't want to be cutting discussion off here, but I do feel the clock ticking in more ways than one. So I think what I'm inclined to do is I want to go back to the conclusion, if we could, David. And what I'm trying to get a sense, I'm sorry, up, David. Thank you. Okay, and to Leslie's point, we'll come to the examples separately. So let's hold that just for a second. Kimberly has made a couple of suggestions, and I don't want to put her or anyone on the spot right now, but I do think that we need to decide as a group whether indeed we have to make any significant changes to this, because we need to get into production mode relatively quickly. Maybe would it be helpful, Kimberly, if we scrolled up a little bit and looked at some of the earlier information where we reference recycling, or I mean, I guess the real question is how firmly are you pushing back against the recommendation, or is this something you're going to be able to live with?
Yeah, and thank you for reading that, Steve. I would say I think I might be the outlier here of our group about kind of the focus of just the elimination of single-use plastics. I recognize that there's some discussion in here about recyclability, but not very much. And so if there is general consensus by the rest of the group on the way that the document is written, I would say that maybe if I'm thinking about how it's presented, as long as I'm given just a space to talk about like where the committee may think about whether or not it needs to be enhanced in any way, I'd be fine with taking that approach.
Okay, I personally have no objection to that, but you know, I don't know that we need to do formal voting as we go round by round, but I do want to make sure that no one feels like we're being steamrolled on any particular portion of this or any language of this. But I have a note here that Luke and I are going to be intentional in terms of as we work through the slides to make sure that the recycling issue gets highlighted when we present it. And then, of course, there's always the opportunity in discussion to see if we need to tweak it at the meeting. Is that going to be okay, Kimberly?
I think that's probably be sufficient. Like I said, as long as I'll have an opportunity to just kind of raise this with the rest of the committee so that there's some discussion about it, I think it'll be fine.
Okay. All right. So, and again, I don't mean to be overly formalistic here, but does anyone else have anything that they feel like we have to discuss in the conclusion before we proceed?
So I just had a question about
Nigel, please.
the term. I'm just unfamiliar. Engage with USDA staff working on research and market development programs and so forth. I had sent the document on industrial hemp paper products for various uses and so forth. So I think that fits into that. I don't know what the term bio-preferred procurement means. That support the goals of waste management and bio-preferred procurement. Is that, you know, organic materials? Is that plant-based materials? What does bio-preferred package? What does that mean?
I can take that one. So that is a program that it kind of falls under the Farm Bill. And I think David just put a link in the chat, but it's a program through USDA that sets kind of baselines for how much biomaterial that is kind of good thresholds for biomaterial in various products. And then if an item is over that threshold, then it's considered bio-preferred. So there are a number of hemp products in that program. Oh yeah, and I'll let David talk. He's has the stats.
No, that's great. So that's what I was trying to understand. I think that's wonderful, and I think that addresses. And I know it's nothing specific on industrial hemp, but I think that does address my desire to have that industry domestic. Is there something in here, Steve, that references the domestic purchasing? I'm thinking of the executive orders and the other DEI inclusion provisions that we were trying to address to grow US based businesses as a part of this. Is there a reference in here? I don't see it.
So I don't want to speak for the experts, but my recollection is this document does not specifically refer to domestic and was much more on the again, reduction and elimination rather than necessarily driving, but I defer to Jenny and David on that.
I know that one version of it, we had added a bullet regarding kind of just giving more of a statement about there are many, things that procurement officials have to abide by or need to keep into consideration. And one of them was small business. But how open to other ways to fitting that in. I'm not sure that made it into the final.
Yeah, and it doesn't, I mean, it's just something, it doesn't have to be as serious as a specific as a Buy America provision, but something that says, things that GSA should consider, should include but not be limited to, growing American industries that would support these objectives and goals, and something like that.
Yes, if I may jump in, Nigel, I want to address your interest in the industrial-based hemp. We had a robust discussion among me, Jenny, and Anish. As an organization that promotes all of the recycling industry, so basically it's every particular kind of material, metals, plastic, paper, other types of materials. It's really quite difficult to only identify one, because I know that we will get requests for every other material out there to be listed too. I have unfortunately been experiencing that for 15 plus years. But we thought that the reference to the USDA program and the BioPreferred program would be a way to lead people to other types of materials, including hemp. So that was our solution to sort of getting the linkage there.
I think that was an excellent choice. I think that was a great choice to give the flexibility necessary. I think that was great.
So they can find that material, if it meets their objectives. And I think my understanding was the reference to the federal sustainability plan. I'm not an expert in it because I'm just looking it up online like anybody else. Seems to point to many different objectives, and maybe it's some of the equity-based ones and preferred for small and other minority-owned businesses, things like that might be in it. I don't know if that's, let's say, explicit enough or it's too implicit and it will be missed by most people. I leave that open to the rest of the subcommittee to opine on.
I think that we had something like this that was initially part of bullet 3 under the overview of current practices used by federal government. So maybe I'd be open to adding that back in.
So I apologize. I'm going to take the chair's prerogative, and I hate to do this kind of stuff, but I'm going to, because the clock is ticking and we have a number of deliverables we have to deal with. So here's what I'm going to suggest for the remaining time we have available. I think that it is important for us as a group to at least give everyone the opportunity to make sure that we agree with the conclusion and that we can live with it. And then I want to turn to the primary recommendations and do the same thing. And then I think this is pretty straightforward, but I guess I want some kind of agreement or indication from, I think, primarily Jenny, David, and Anish, that they're willing to help with the presentations. But then I think we need to agree that at some point, and I'm willing to negotiate here, whether it's close of business Friday or on Saturday, we have to have any final input that we're going to try to circulate to resolution. So I guess what I'd like to do, I'm going to go out of order, but I think that we need to agree when we're going to stop working on the document. And unless somebody objects, I'm willing to say Saturday, and then we'll do our best for discussing it today, but understand that input after a certain day isn't going to get into the documents that are going to be presented in May, but as was mentioned earlier, doesn't mean that we can't discuss them at the meeting. So I realize I've been rambling, but are we okay with going forward at this point? I don't want to be stepping on toes. We need to get done.
Yep, I think that's a great idea, Steve.
Okay, so again, what I heard from Kimberly is that we have a way to proceed with the conclusion, and that that again, she will be given the opportunity to embellish more at the meeting if necessary, but I'm not hearing any other, at the moment, objections to what's in the conclusion. So I'm going to pause for a moment and then we're going to roll to the recommendations. Okay, wonderful. David, if you could scroll to the recommendation section, please. And for anyone who hasn't spent time with the document, keep in mind that the sequence is recommendations and additional considerations. So again, I think we should focus on the recommendations. And David, I think if temporarily you could make you could scroll or widen the view just a little bit, and then maybe even temporarily break the page so we have the whole recommendation thing in front of us at one time. As it maybe go down to 150%, try that. Okay. All right, so. And if we just take a moment to look at the recommendations and then see if anyone feels like we have to change anything here. I don't want to speak for anyone else, but I'm more than willing to accept silence as consent. But does anyone have any comments?
So this is Kimberly. I'm okay with the bullets as they stand now.
Okay. All right, then if David, if you don't mind, if you could do the same thing with the additional considerations then. And just to be clear, the word considerations here, I think that some have suggested is potentially suboptimal and we might want something else, supplemental recommendations or additional potential recommendations. I don't have strong feelings on that, but if anybody has the optimal terminology to make this transition a little bit more smooth, I think this would be a great moment, or you could do that by email later.
Is this an invitation to jump in?
By all means.
I guess it's good to look at something that you helped write with days of not looking at it. So, because you can see it differently. I'm just wondering, maybe we can just remove additional, because at some level, these are things they should consider while considering the hierarchy that was above in the recommendation. So maybe that's a way, I don't know if it makes it smoother, but maybe that's a way to make it strengthen it a little bit. If that's, I think, what you were getting at. That additional would suggest they don't have to consider them at all.
I think that would definitely be better. I'm still not convinced that considerations is the perfect word, but I definitely like the label better without the word additional. So unless somebody objects, David, you can surgically remove that as we speak.
I just have a question about bullet 4, I think, when considering material substitution for plastic packaging marketed as compostable. So does that mean it is a plastic material, but it is marketed as compostable, or it is not a plastic material?
So I don't want to speak for the true subject matter experts here, but I think that everything here is under the umbrella of starting with plastics. So I defer
Is this
to
a grammar
Jenny.
question? Is this really a grammar question where which preposition belongs to which thing?
Yeah, I think it, for me, I guess when I read it, I wasn't sure whether or not it was like a plastic material that is compostable or it's a non-plastic material. Like, I don't know, it was just wonky for me, maybe just reading it.
I think it just acknowledges the kind of some issues around claims of compostability for certain materials. So I think that had to do with the wording there, rather than just saying compostable, saying marketed as compostable.
Right, I guess, is it the materials that is the substitution, the thing that's being marketed as compostable?
Yes, but I could also see just saying compostable potentially, if that, depending on the
'Cause
audience.
I think it suggested that the plastic packaging was marketed. I didn't read it that way the first time, but now I see that it could be understood that way too. So I wasn't sure. I knew what it was supposed to mean, so I read it the way I understand it's supposed to mean, but not everyone would read it the same way.
So maybe a question for the folks that wrote it. If you took out plastic packaging, does it mean what it's still supposed to mean in that sentence?
No, I think that would change the meaning.
Okay.
And I also think that it potentially broadens and goes outside the scope here, so
Okay.
I don't have strong feelings on this. Part of me leans towards leaving it, but I do defer to David and Jenny if they think that there's a tweak we should make in here. So at this point, would we be okay with David and Jenny taking one more look at this before we wrap, or do we feel like we need to address it further?
I mean, to the extent that it's really it's a word order question rather than a big philosophical question. Maybe Jenny and Anish and I can look at it. And
Okay, that would be great. Antonio, please.
Hey, good afternoon, everybody. I'm sorry I wasn't able to join immediately at the start of the meeting. I just had a question. I'm trying to make sure I'm fully understanding the last sentence in that same bullet. Also consider end-of-life implications for items marked as biodegradable. So is that, can somebody explain a little bit more what that means within that context?
Sure, I can. David, do you want to touch on that?
I'm happy to defer to you, and then I'll come in if you want me to further elucidation. That's please proceed, Jenny.
I have a 2-year-old homesick with me, so you might hear some extra noises. But so there's a distinction between biodegradable and compostable, and the Federal Trade Commission's green guides goes into some of those distinctions where there's a lot more, standardization around the word compostable and standards available. Whereas for biodegradable, there are even some states that have made it so that companies cannot claim certain products are biodegradable. So, David, I don't know if you have more to say on that.
I think from our perspective, that is the recycling industry's perspective, to the extent that they're not marked as biodegradable and they look the same as everything else, I think there's a question about whether they're as durable during the recycling process as sort of chemically similar plastics or identical plastics that don't have the additives or other things that make them biodegradable. So it's really about sort of the recycling side of things that it could complicate the recycling of those materials.
Okay, so
it's a little bit of inside ball. I think your point is well taken. It's a bit opaque.
yeah. So in my mind, I was just thinking about, like if you're in San Francisco, there's like 4 different, ways that you dispose of trash. And this almost feels like a 5th one, it's the biodegradable ones that, aren't normally there at the, the food court or whatever, where you might be.
Yeah, and that's part of kind of what we're getting, like a wonky way of saying that, that biodegradable really isn't an option, that it has to be kind of fit one of those end of life pathways like composting or recyclability.
Okay, thank you.
And going back to the, without being too wonky, I actually think this is one of those things that if nothing else, it's important to be in there because I think that people don't necessarily think through this issue at the beginning. And I think including it as a marker as nothing else is a big value add here. Okay, anything else on this particular section? All right, so if no one else is objecting, let me suggest that at least from, I don't want to say my Machiavellian, but my outcome-oriented perspective as to what we have to do, that these are the primary chunks that I think we really need to be able to say as a subcommittee we had some level of agreement on. Again, let's really make an effort. If you see particular language in anything else in the document that you want to make suggestions to, please share that with the group, let's say no later than Saturday night. And then we'll do our very, very best to include them. And I want to go back and reiterate the point that Leslie made earlier about the fact that to some extent the introduction is a placeholder and we can do a fair number of things on this, but one of the things that we were trying to do is keep the document relatively brief. And for those of you that haven't spent time with it, the appendix in many ways empowered us to do that. So there's a fair amount of actually interesting content in there you may want to take a look at as well. And obviously we could tweak that as well. But my inclination, unless people are objecting, is to basically say we have enough agreement that we're down to tweaking at this point. But I think also would like to make sure that we're okay on how we're going to proceed on presentation. So barring some objection, I'm assuming, I think Luke and I are assuming that Jenny and David are more than willing to not only speak, but take somewhat of a leadership role with regard to the presentation. And as Boris was saying, Luke and I will start and finish because that's what we've been tasked with. But in terms of again, we can go backwards. 20 minutes total, we have other things to talk about. So 15 to 17 minutes while we're talking about these topics, it might be really helpful for us if David, Jenny, and Anish gave us some insight as to what aspects of the recommendation they'd be most interested in talking about, and then we can structure our slides from there. But I think Boris is going to push us in a meaningful direction now.
No. I was just gonna, actually something you said a little bit ago, Steve, I think I've looked at your introduction and I think it does a decent job of setting the context for the recommendation. And that's the purpose of the introduction, to really, this is not a standalone document, but it fits within the mission of your subcommittee. So I think it does a decent job actually of doing that. So just wanted to comment on that.
So let me rephrase my question then another way. On the assumption that Jenny and David and Anish are on the hook and working with us to present this, is there anyone else on the subcommittee that is looking for a speaking role at the May meeting and has a particular thing that they want to address either with regard to this recommendation or anything else in our allocated 20 minutes? Okay, well, I find that relatively encouraging. So part of me feels like we've accomplished the primary things that we need to do. Again, without necessarily trying to push things along, I do think that one of the things we're supposed to do today is ask for public input. And my sense is we don't necessarily have anyone that we should be concerned about.
Hey, Steve, we do have Dan Walt right now. So if you wanted to go ahead and do some public comment, Dan, I see that you join in. So this is an opportunity to comment.
I don't currently have any comment. I don't feel I'm in a position to do that at this point. So
Okay,
I'm in listen mode, and then once you get past the main meeting, then we'll talk again.
okay,
Until then, I'm in listen mode.
all right.
Let
Thank
me
you,
turn
Dan.
my camera on for just a second. There. Okay. Yeah, I'm in listen mode for now. Thank you.
Great. Steve, if I could interject just for a moment, so look, I'll be the first to admit I am not a master slide person. I feel like I went to school during the generation between when PowerPoint was important, and so if there's anybody out there that feels they have skills to make a presentation more than just kind of recapturing the text of the paper, which is probably the limits of my abilities, please let us know. I feel like these, what we've started to do and is kind of take the important points of this paper and fill out the template for the presentation, but that will obviously be subject to some additional edits from you folks up until Saturday night. But also making them a little more interesting and exciting. If you feel like you have that skill, please let us know. Jenny's raising her hand. Hopefully that's to volunteer.
No, sorry. I would not say that I make the most beautiful presentations. But I was just going to say that I think we should definitely focus on the substance of what the recommendations actually are, so that the things in the appendix to highlight those, I think makes sense, and then touch on kind of some of the general principles as well. But I think the document's looking good now. So
yeah.
So to Luke and Jenny's point, realistically, based on what we saw at the last time we all had to make a presentation from the subcommittee, is at the end, Luke and I basically end up cleaning up the slides in the end. So we're going to do our best. But I think to Jenny's point and the request that Luke was making earlier, if you think there are visuals or individual things you want to highlight, like, for example, I think the point that Kimberly made earlier is the kind of thing that we can emphasize in a slide without derailing the presentation, but drawing people's attention to it. So keep in mind, the baseline minimum would be that we would systematically march through the document. We're obviously not going to read the document at this point, but if there are things that you think that we should highlight, let us know. And in addition, if you think that there are visuals that would be helpful, and I think that we should, without too much difficulty, be able to come up with something to represent the most heinous and common plastic single-use disposables, and possibly as well, maybe even something on composting. But again, we welcome your input, and we'll do our best to pull it all together. And let me also say that, to Amlin's point, any positive reinforcement is greatly appreciated. I mean, we've done our best to bend over backwards to thank Jenny and David and Anish for all their work. But, again, thanks for the positive feedback. I think we're actually moving in a pretty good direction. Other thoughts? Antonio, please.
All right. Make sure I'm off the mute. Okay. Yeah, I found this document, and I got a chance to read the others as well. Really, actually very impressive, given this is a body of folks that just came together, really a few short months ago, and put their collective heads and wisdom together to draft this. So it's definitely good work. The one question I had, it really kind of started when I started looking at the examples. We had like San Francisco, 2 other examples towards the end of the document. And I was wondering in my head, do we have a notional benefit value, something that we could or should be pointing to that says doing these things is going to have X effect, even though I realize it's probably a very, very hard statement or measure to even suggest. But I didn't know if in my absence from a prior meeting, if you guys really debated this and to what extent there is or was some discussion around this.
either Jenny or David, did you want to weigh in on that?
And if my question wasn't so clear, like part of me wanted to be able to see something that says, doing this, what we're proposing is likely to save, X amount of things environmentally, or it's likely to create, more jobs, or it's likely to do something with, our overall efficiency and use of raw materials. I don't know what those things would be, but that was what was in the back of my head.
Yeah, I think I just would wonder how much. So that is a pretty short document. So but you think finding a couple of examples to put in there would be helpful, it sounds like.
Yeah, we talked a little bit about that. We thought a little more geographic diversity would be good, but we just couldn't come up with that as kind of a first measure. It'd be great to
with that, with the extra little bit of time, we could probably do that as well. That was on our list, but we didn't get to it.
Yeah, that's true. I don't know that we have a good sort of impact calculation for what these will achieve.
Right.
It's a great question, because I think everyone's trying to figure out what does it actually do. I don't know that we have any assessment of any of those programs that they've calculated. Maybe there is buried on the website. It says we've done this for 3 years and we estimate so much of this or that was avoided and so much was saved. I don't know that we have. I haven't researched it, so I don't know if that information exists.
Yeah, when I saw the San Francisco example, I thought, well, San Francisco has been in this game, I think probably as longer than any other geographic market that I can think of. Maybe they have something that they could point to, or that we could have used this as a bit more of an example, but that was as close as I got. So anyway, that was just a question. I realize it's a tough, tall order to quantify, but I didn't know if it had been really considered and discussed much.
So let me jump in a little bit here, Antonio. One thing that could also be an option here is there could be some follow-up work on this recommendation. So it could even be a phase 2 where you would actually go into maybe doing the benefit analysis. So there could be some follow-up work after this, which
I'll just say at the beginning of our sort of task force conversation, I think all of us have seen airports where they have refilling stations. I just don't know who chose to do that, or whether that was each individual airport authority did that, or so I don't even know how we would capture that, say if that was an example of a reuse.
Yeah, there are some reports. I know there are a lot. Sorry, my 2-year-old is loud. There are many related specifically to plastic bag reduction laws and looking at the efficacy or effectiveness there. And there are some for reusables as well. So I think that's something we could add a couple of examples. And not that we want to make it too much longer.
We need to do it quickly.
Yeah.
Jenny, David, I just wanted to ask as well, because I read the document and I thought I think it's a pretty good document. But are there any EPA standards out there that would be applicable to the document that we could probably include and reference? And it's just a question.
I think in the appendix, and maybe that's where we find some of the detail. I know we talked about it.
Yeah, I know we referenced the recycled content that's required by EPA, the comprehensive procurement guidelines, and we talk about there's a link to the standards recommended by EPA. So I think those.
It's in the overview of current practices. It's
right. And I'm just asking questions. And what about timeline? Is that something that you think that you all could discuss in your presentation? Like, if everything went the way you think it should go, what would be the proposed timeline in order to implement something or something like this? What would be a time span?
You want me to jump in, Jenny? I'll jump in. No, that's a great question. I think I don't know that we specifically discussed that, because I think we were motioning or pushing toward or indicating toward a rulemaking. And some of the rulemaking might guide some of the timing of that. But we also have pilots that are kind of, could be done now if there was someone to lead them. So we don't directly address that, but it's a good question. I'm not sure how we had articulated in this document, given potential rulemaking and some other options that we provide that could be done, next week, starting next week, if there was a champion for it.
So I think that's a great point. And I think, one of the things that we're looking for is, low hanging fruit, things that can get done right away. And I think to your point, David, some of those pilots, there's activity that can be picked up right away. And so maybe it's just a sentence or two. The subcommittee believes that the pilot initiatives, however we want to phrase it, or however we want to draw a circle around it, are all things that can be done immediately while the rulemaking process is in place. Something that, something that provides that a timeline was part of the thinking here, or at least is a consideration now. Now that we put some framework. So I know if I was reading this paper, the last thing I'd want would be a timeline telling me when to do things. But knowing that that there are things here that we can do right away, maybe as the recipient of this, I take it and I hand it to my chief of staff and I say, let's do those 5 things that can be done right away, and we'll wait on the rest. So I think that's actually a great suggestion. We can work that in somewhere.
Thank you, Luke, and Steffi, thank you for raising that. I think actually all of it potentially could be done through contracting officers. I think that's what the Boris, I think, suggested a different language rather than procurement, contracting officials. I think they could do any of that. I guess the only thing that kind of sticks in the back of my mind, whether if they went in one direction and a rulemaking said you can't go in that direction, I don't know the likelihood of that. That's the only kind of small concern I would have is that possibility. It may be remote, but
so I wouldn't let that get in our way. I mean, I would say we can make the recommendation, and if the GSA's lawyers come up with a counter timeline saying A, B, and C can't be done, then so be it. But
yeah, and one thing I like about the way you guys approach this is you really focused it on GSA, which is where GSA has the ability to make it actionable. And so that it's one thing to do a GSA, it's quite another to do a government one. That's a whole nother ball game. So that's one of the things I like about the approach you guys took.
So thank you for that, Stephanie. That's the 4th dimension, right? Time. I don't recall if time was addressed in the other recommendations. That might be a good suggestion to go to the other groups on too, because I think that, being able for the administrator to bucket things into what can be done right away and what might take a little longer is probably a good tool.
And the timing also, I think, is a dialogue with GSA too. So once Jeff gets in there, and that's because they understand so much of what's happening within the agency, and they're able to weigh in on the timing, and that's the thing. I think to some extent, I think it's appropriate to leave a little bit of that open, just because of the agency itself will be able to determine.
This is a question maybe for you, Boris and Stephanie, and anyone else from GSA is, would an initiative require a contract to expire and then you would sort of re-up the contract? Or is that kind of part of the timeline too, is when you have to wait till something expires or is about to expire, or there's a renewal period? Because that's the thing, I don't know anything about that. So I don't know if that fits into the whole time frame.
Yeah, Stephanie, if you want to talk to your procurement background.
I guess, David, I'm a little unclear on what you're asking, because I think as it relates to this particular recommendation, I don't see how that would really apply if we set a standard. So I'm kind of confused on what you're asking.
All right, and this may be my naivete about the whole process, so I apologize for that. It would be something like, let's say there is a current supplier that is supplying, let's say, disposable plasticware for cafeteria, and they've got maybe they have a 1-year contract. I don't know how that works. you have to wait till that contract is over before saying we're renewing or we're reproposing or considering other contractors, and they should have these attributes that follow the sort of recommendations. But we have to wait for that year period, or we could tell that, you know, we're canceling your contract or we're reopening this up. I don't know how that works.
Yes, so I see where you're going. Yes, most likely you would wait until your contract expires. And if it was something that was urgent enough that could not wait, what the CO or the contracting officer would do would be to implement a modification, and they would both have to agree. Both parties would have to agree to adopt that modification during the time span of that contract. So it could be either or. You got it.
Okay. It kind of gets into, again, this is supposed to be a short document, how to articulate sort of the timeliness factor, and that some of these things could be implementable as, you know, soon as practicable. Maybe the practicable is a very vague word for contracts expiring, contract modifications. However, the senior management decides, you know, to do that.
Agreed. Okay. I see Steve had to drop, unfortunately. And I think we were getting ready to close up the discussion on this paper with the caveat that folks will still have until late Saturday to comment, leaving us Sunday and Monday to put together a deck for, you know, I guess delivery on Tuesday or run through next Thursday, right? Is that what we're going to do for us? So
yeah, and to be clear, look, the dry run on Tuesday, we're not expecting final slice, so that could be draft. It could be rough. It doesn't have to be a final product on Tuesday. That's just your first shot at it. Yeah.
Yes, it'll definitely be rough. So,
yeah.
Okay, great. So I think this is great. It's good to hear we have really general consensus on the major concepts, and we're kind of, you know, we're nudging around the edges here. But all in all, great work all around. And thank you all for providing your input. Thank you, Steve, for taking us through the paper. You know, very, very exciting. I know it feels like we've taken a very narrow slice here, but I think this was a very important initiative. I think the GSA is really looking forward to this. You know, my understanding is that the thought on this kind of began or was commenced or nudged by the petition from 180 businesses on the Center for Biodiversity. Is that right? Something along those lines. But the birth of this was really the public reaching out and saying, hey, GSA, we want you to think about this and think about creating a rule. And so for this committee to have an opportunity to voice an opinion on it, I think is very exciting. And I think, we were given an opportunity to have a voice on something timely and relevant, and you guys should be very proud of yourselves for coming up with something meaningful. With respect to other business we wanted to do today, the other item I wanted to advance, even if just to get some volunteers, was our discussion.
Look,
yep, go ahead, Boris.
If I could start before you go there, one more point I wanted to make on the presentation is that there is a slide there or two where you also talk about the other recommendations that the subcommittee is working on. So case in point, the automation, the technology discussions that I think have actually taken us pretty far, and I think very, very promising areas. So I think it's worth thinking about that in the presentation as well. So these are some of the other things that the subcommittee is thinking about. And so the point I'm making here is GSA can go different ways, but there's a couple of paths that you could get the feedback from GSA. It says, yes, we like this recommendation that you put together. We'd like for you to do maybe a deeper dive, perhaps even a phase 2. But we also like this recommendation you're working on the technology piece. So you could potentially end up with that kind of feedback where you take a couple of paths here. You're continuing to work on the phase 2 of this one that you're presenting, but then you're also working on the other. So that's something to think about. as you're going to be getting feedback from GSA in terms of, you know, what they feel would be most beneficial going forward.
Yep.
But yeah.
Yeah. So I guess my dilemma with the technology related recommendation is we don't really have one necessarily yet.
Right.
I think we had a great meeting with some GSA folks, Stephen Baker, Michael Cooper. We unfortunately didn't have a good opportunity to debrief with this group about it and kind of get some feedback. But from my opinion, and I'd like to open this up for a few minutes if we can, there was an enormous amount of material that came out of that meeting that could lend itself to a next round of recommendations. You know, the idea of greenwashing, the idea of good concrete data, qualified products list, the difficulty of matching products, attributes, labels, and certifications, making the GSA Advantage a payment processing center. I mean, there were a litany of things that came out that I think we could explore a little deeper and come up with some recommendations on. And I think what we need to do is, and we've talked about this in prior meetings, is do what we did on single-use plastics and have kind of a subgroup lead the direction and take a deeper dive. And in an earlier conversation, we did have, I think, Stacy and Amlan kind of volunteer for that, to lead that subgroup. Is there anybody here in this meeting today who would also like to participate in that subgroup? I think what they would be tasked with doing is maybe exploring and taking a deeper dive into the GSA tools and technologies and trying to put some recommendations around what we heard at that last meeting. And in my own opinion, taking a look at some of the things that are going on in the industry, seeing the advancements that have been made in areas like AI. I think what we have seen just since the commencement of this committee, the breathtaking speed with which AI has been adopted as a workplace tool, gives us a timely opportunity to either recommend something, to incorporate it, flag it, warn it, run from it. I don't know, but like that, it's become the only thing people are talking about right now, and it fits, at least with the way I see things, how all of these technology tools and trying to rope them together. So I'm not sure if I would love to see another recommendation or another volunteer for that group, so we could have 3.
So I'd like to volunteer for that. Because I'd like to learn more about how that tool can be leveraged for the goals that we've already set out. Even for the industry outreach, how can those tools collect data, be able to identify firms that may not be easily identifiable by traditional methods?
Great. Okay, good. So I think we've got a task group of 3 for task number 1. And if we can, I think it would be great to maybe have an initial meeting with those 3, myself and Steve, before the May 4th meeting. So we could at least report on the May 4th meeting that group has been formed, has had a meeting, and is maybe starting to think through what those recommendations might start to look like.
I can
Go ahead,
read
Nigel.
I can read material, but I'm going to be out of the country. That's why I can't make it to May 4th. So
Okay.
you guys send me
Noted.
stuff to read and get smart on. I'd be happy to do it.
Great. Okay. Perfect. We'll still take you, and enjoy your vacation wherever it is.
Thank you.
Okay, so how does that sound, Boris?
No,
Stephanie, does that
sounds
sound
good.
right? Because
Yeah,
I
that
think
sounds
we've
good.
got
and you don't
we've got
have
to
to
keep
have
that one moving. Yep.
Yeah, you don't have to have a plan for May 4th, but I think it's just introduce the idea that's just started there. Yeah.
Yep.
Yeah, this is Dan Walt.
Hey,
Could
Dan.
you add me to your list of interested people, or are you full up?
Hey, Dan. Unfortunately, we've already had the public input section.
Okay,
Yeah, and so we're not able to take any more input right now.
that's fine. That's
Okay.
fine, thank you.
Okay.
Sorry, Dan. Okay, that's great. Okay. I don't have any other business. Boris, Stephanie, any reminders for the group?
No, I think you've got, yeah, you got quite a bit on your plate here, but I think, it's just looking good. I feel like we're pulling it all together. I don't know, Stephanie, if there was anything else to cover today.
No, I don't have anything, but if Dave or Jenny and Anish would like to gather, have another quick session, admin session or preparatory session, just let me know and I'll set up something for tomorrow or whenever.
Okay, great.
Okay.
All right.
Well, in that case, I'll go ahead and adjourn the meeting and you can stop the recording.